everyone to Otalku, the show where otaku talk about otaku topics. And I have with me here today the ever wonderful Ed Sizemore via Skype. Hey Ed, how you doing?
Good, how you doing?
Doing well, doing well. And thought we'd talk today about, as you can see on the bottom, those of you who are watching this, the difficulties of translating anime and manga in particular over to English. And I think a lot of folks just don't appreciate how complex that is, not just how complex, but all the different factors involved. I mean, it is a really, really difficult thing. And one of the problems, too, is just the whole question of what approach is being taken with the manga. I don't know, Ed, have you come across anything that, comes across as a particularly awkward translation that you can think of off the top of your head?
Probably the one that gets quoted the most is Okuyu. It's the the one that by Viz that takes place in feudal Japan, and so they use a faux Shakespeare accent on everybody.
Right.
And that has really been divisive among a lot of people. Some people, after a volume, kind of ignore it, and then some people just can't get past that first volume, and so they put it down.
Yeah. Do you think that was a good choice on their part?
I wish they weren't so heavy-handed. I don't mind a little Shakespearean to make it sound a little more formal, but it's a little thick at times. But otherwise, I can live without it. The other example that I'll bring up is, and I can't remember which volume it is. It might be volume 2 of Hellsing. They and I actually attended a panel with the translator, and when the priest shows up, he has a thick Scottish brogue.
Oh, wow.
And so the translator did 2 sets of translations, and he said he gave him this really thick brogue, and then he gave one that was just lightly accented. But what he had done is he had left the thick brogue in the original translation text, and kind of footnoted to say, if you think this is a little unreadable, then there's an alternate translation attached. Not realizing that editors don't have time to make those decisions. So they just went with what was incorporated into the text. And so it was funny because he said, he says, when I saw it, I realized how unreadable it was. And he says, so in that volume, it's really bad. He says, but I learned that to do it lightly. And, guys like William Flanagan talk about that. How do you deal with an accent and try to make that readable?
Yeah, and accents are hard just in general in writing. I mean, I
Right.
know when I just write in general, and the further you get into that accent, the harder it is just to read in general. Plus, manga being just such a fast medium to consume, it just it's even worse.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, and then you add to it the great debate about what is an Osaka accent.
Oh yeah.
So what does it mean for the Japanese versus what does it mean for an American reader? And how do you try to convey the fact that this person is speaking non-Tokyo Japanese?
Yeah.
And then, I've seen everything from like Brooklyn to Deep South to, just everybody tries a different approach. So
yeah, Deep South is what I seem to come across most often, which is interesting, partly just because of the whole, that has all sorts of connotations to Americans too.
Right.
So
right.
It's just, and trying to match that is really interesting. And which gets down to that I think one of the core questions, which is, when you're doing these translations, the fact that someone's from Osaka is significant. And how do you get that across to an audience that has no idea the difference between Tokyo and Osaka?
Yeah, part of that's going to have to be translator notes, but then some of it I think is just maybe through the character themselves. The kind of the classic example I think of is Osaka in Azumanga Daioh.
Yeah.
Which the initial joke is because part of the joke of being an Osakan is you're supposed to be like a country bumpkin. And so everybody's expecting her to be a little slow, and the joke is she's not just slow, but she's not just the country bumpkin. She is like totally out of it. And so that kind of joke backfires on them because they're like, oh, wow. we were just going to make a little fun of you, and we can't make fun of you nearly to the extent that you make fun of yourself. So.
Poor Osaka.
Yes.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, she's a great kind of extreme example. Yeah, it's always difficult because like what is the Japanese version of a country bumpkin versus, let's say, an American version of a country bumpkin? Obviously, and even that's changed. I'm thinking about if you ever watched the old movie No Time for Sergeants.
I don't think so. No.
It's an old Andy Griffith film. It's one of the ones that put him on the map. Mm-hmm. And at the beginning of the film, he is living in the Appalachian Mountains, and they come to draft him for the army. And he's literally, the torn jeans, barefoot. It's it's the little Abner personified. And so, 50 years ago, that was a country bumpkin, and then today, people would never go with that kind of broad stereotypes in America anymore. But
yeah, we have this whole legacy of the Civil War and what that did to the South, and it's a very different perspective. And I think also you have the difficulty in Japan that there's a veneration of the farmer and of the sort of classic, calm, My Neighbor Totoro style life, which we just we don't venerate farmers the way at least it's done in manga and anime in Japan.
No, that's true. We don't really have, other than even guys like John Mellencamp, who's the big kind of advocate for farmers. But yeah, he doesn't romanticize. In My Neighbor Totoro, it looks like working on a farm is fun, and it's like even John Mellencamp's like, look, this is hard work, man. I'm not gonna play this up. These guys sweat. It's dirty. It's nasty. So Miyazaki has always kind of come under fire for the fact that he's
weird.
Yeah, well, he loves that rural lifestyle, but then people are like, have you ever actually lived that lifestyle? You're a city boy looking out at the country.
Yeah, no, he's been bent over a drawing board for the past 900 years making anime. So yeah, absolutely. It's a very different thing, and it's also that I think that's gets into one of the other issues is that manga and anime aren't reality, and they are very rarely trying to even really reflect reality. In fact, when you were talking about on your podcast about Barefoot Gen, and how that manga really is sort of more a while being something autobiographical, also kind of a mouthpiece for the author in a lot of ways, and that's just what manga is.
Right, exactly. No, yeah, I agree with you. I think when we're talking about translation issues, it's funny because having just did a podcast about 20th Century Boys, and then wrote a piece on some older Takahashi books, the Rumik books, which is Viz doing a very different translation philosophy than
how so?
Well, originally translations were meant to be read as perfect English. So prior to Tokyo Pop in the manga revolution, the idea was that you strip out the honorifics, you strip out common Japanese terms, and you replace them with English terms. So a good example is in the Takahashi short story collection. People address each other by their last names, but it's Mr. and Mrs.
Oh, okay.
So it's none of this like Watanabe-san. It's Mr. Watanabe, Mrs. Watanabe. And I was reading that and thinking, this flows so smoothly.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I was like, you know what? I'm really beginning to understand. I'm not a fan of the honorifics, and in most cases, you don't need them because the kind of social stratification people assume exists in Japanese society is not quite that intense. So it was interesting to read, and Viz's signature line does this a lot because it's trying to appeal to an American comic audience. So their translations tend to be a lot more stripped out of the English stuff. So you're not going to hear somebody talk about binto. They'll talk about their lunch.
Ah, gotcha.
Things like that. And I just was reading it going, you know what? When you get rid of that garbage, you get to focus on the story and the characters. And it's and this I posted the Takahashi piece today, and I said it. I said, you know, when you're reading some of these books, it's that Japaneseness keeps getting slapped in the face. It's like you're reading a Japanese book about Japanese people taking place in Japan, and they're doing Japanese things, and I'm like, can I just read a book about people living life and having experiences, and then focus on that instead?
Yeah. Well, Makoto Shinkai was talking about this recently, actually, where he was saying that I think he said he showed 5 centimeters per second in Russia.
Oh, wow.
And people were very appreciative, and but he said he was looking at it and he was realizing this is all about cherry blossoms and trains running on time and, you know, this beautiful mountain village and so forth. And it's just so Japanese. And he was really wondering how much can that Russian audience really appreciate, you know, the story I'm telling when I'm sort of throwing all these Japanese cliches at them. And so he said he decided for his upcoming work he's going to try to make it less, in a sense, stereotypically Japanese. And of course that's just sort of, you know, his decision on that. But I thought it was a very interesting idea that it's very hard for anyone to sort of pull oneself out of your cultural milieu. But I think it is worth realizing that a lot of that stuff is in there, not necessarily because the author is, you know, because the fact that those are cherry blossoms are an incredibly important thing, but just because that's what is in manga all the time.
Oh, right. Well, I mean, a good example of where, like, the Japaneseness, I don't mind the Japaneseness in a story is A Distant Neighborhood, which yeah, which is, I mean, you have to know a little bit about Japanese culture. This is a book where translation notes would help a little bit. One of the things is you have to know how significant butterflies are for the concept of I mean, we have the concept of butterfly meaning metamorphosis, but we don't use it quite as heavily as a symbol as like the Japanese do. So in the moment when the lead character is transported back to his own teenage self, there's a page of butterflies. And there's a big signal here that something's happening. The other thing is and I've seen it used in a couple other manga. It's the 29th anniversary of his mother's death, and that's a significant number. Yeah. In some forms of Buddhism, and so when you know that when he includes that fact, what he's saying is this is kind of my mother's departed spirit is putting me on this journey for my own good. It's kind of a last, or one of her acts of motherliness from the grave. And so, you know, again, that's very typical Japanese, but it works well and it helps with the story. So I don't mind it, you know, being very Japanese in that sense. You just don't have to, on top of that, make all the dialogue, you know, just filled with Japanese terms, so that then people are like spending half the time in the back reading the notes, going, "Oh, that's what that is."
Yeah,
oh, yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's one of the difficulty. I think it's one of the reasons why. I mean, and I guess for a long time we haven't had to have that problem because manga has been such a huge growth industry.
Right.
But I think for that industry to continue to grow, you know, you need to be able to bring in those folks who don't know what san or chan or sensei or any other terms mean. And granted, I mean, one of the frustrations I've had is fan subs. My gosh, you know, it's like, you know, half the words are left untranslated, and it just seems a little over the top. But getting back to that question of that, I mean, there's this one issue regarding that. I mean, how do you get across those, you know, very distinctive Japanese things that are part of the work that just kind of you can't get away from?
Yeah, I think cultural notes help a little bit, because I think you're always going to, I mean, particularly, let's, you know, go back to, and I always mispronounce it, so, Okuyu. I mean, that's taking place in feudal Japan. You're going to have to throw some cultural notes in the back there, because feudal Japan is really different than, let's say, feudal Europe, and the way things are stratified and how that works is just so different.
Feudalism, oh boy.
So I think that's a good point where you say, we're just going to have to do some notes in the back, and you indicate in the main text, look, we'll explain what this is, or the concept of kami for people who aren't familiar with the Japanese culture. That's really tough, because if you translate it God, that has a whole set of connotations, and there, even if you're using a lowercase g, people are thinking like Zeus and Apollo, and the Japanese are like, no, nothing so grandiose.
Right.
No, So again, some of that you just have to do through those translations, which is why I'm a big fan of books that do those, because there are things you just have to explain. A good example where I fault the company for not using translation notes is Yen Press in Yotsuba.
Oh, okay.
Because it's an all ages book.
Yeah.
There's a lot of it's very steeped in the Japanese culture.
Yeah.
And a lot of the jokes you don't really need to know the Japanese culture to get, but it helps a lot to know the culture to get the full kind of nuance of the joke.
Yeah.
So and I think because it's an all ages book, this is a great place to throw in those notes and to help kids understand some of the culture.
Good point. Absolutely. I remember being surprised reading some of that and flipping to the back and going, they'll explain. Wait, it's not there. What's going on? Definitely. And I think a good example there actually is getting back to Oku, however you pronounce it. I think for something like that, where it's going to be something so intensely Japanese, you should expect a certain amount of that, very Japanese culture into it. For something like Naruto, I don't think that's going to be quite the expectation.
True. Yeah, and when, of course, maybe the cultural notes of Naruto are, this is why he's not a real ninja.
The orange jumpsuit might be a sign.
That's right, yeah. These are things that real ninjas never did. So, Bleach would be another example. Bleach is really interesting because it is such a blend of Western and Japanese culture. You almost need cultural notes to say, well, this is when we're stealing from the West, and this is when we're stealing from our own tradition. So it's really crazy.
And this is when we're just kind of doing filler forever.
Yeah, well, that's true too. If you ever get a chance to see Charles Dunbar, who runs the Study of Anime website, does a whole panel on Shinigami, death gods in Japan.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating because he brings out all these cultural concepts. And then when I look at Bleach, I go, oh wow, you really see how this is pulling from, like, there's a little bit of Christianity, here's some Buddhism, we got some Shintoism coming in here, and then here's the author just making crazy stuff up. It's like, wow.
Interesting.
So,
yeah, I think it's one of the reasons why Bleach remains popular is that, it's pulling from so many different sources that it manages to remain, I don't want to say fresh per se in the sort of the technical sense or in the classical sense, but more in the sense that it really doesn't quite feel like anything else. And it's one of the reasons why I think Bleach is one of those things that can be kind of difficult to comprehend. And getting back to the whole translation thing, is that there's just so much stuff in it. Trying to really make sense of it is almost a fool's. It's not really supposed to make sense. It's supposed to be exciting.
Right. Yeah, it for a shonen series, you're right. You don't worry about getting all of the nuances if it has nuances. That's always a problem.
Yes.
But it helps. I think it does help if you throw some notes in the back for people who are trying to figure out, like, why is it called a zanpakuto? What is that? Where does that term come from? And the different terms for different samurai swords or blades, and what those kind of things are. At the same time, I can understand, like, publishers page space is always limited, so it's always difficult to do stuff like that.
Yeah. This brings up another question. What are your thoughts on the tendency on some series to include notes in the back that sort of like, here are the terms and characters and so forth that we've seen so far in the story? I'm not sure about that.
Let's see. For 20th Century Boys, I thank God there's a character.
Oh, yes, amen. Oh boy!
And not what I love about 20th Century Boys, and credit to Viz for doing this, is not only a picture of the characters as they currently appear in the story, but the characters as they appeared when they were 8 or 10 years old.
That's true, yeah.
Because a lot of times I have to go back and go, okay, wait, which one wore the striped shirt as a kid? Oh yeah, okay, all right, I get this now. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, those I don't mind. The funny part is whenever I read like the story thus far kind of stuff, I don't find it very helpful. I mean, a lot depending on some series, it has a pretty base storyline, so you can just pick something up. But I remember I got sent, I think it was like volume 8 of Vampire Knight.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I hadn't read anything of Vampire Knight. So I go to the story thus far, which is like 3 paragraphs, and I go, I still don't know what this is. So I was like, this is impossible. This is one of these series if you're not, it's like a soap opera. If you haven't started from the beginning, you're not picking this thing out.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the things too. I think in general, manga is kind of designed to be for the fan of that manga.
Right.
It's not really meant to be pulling anyone else. Speaking of which, I'm now intensely curious. I'm about I feel like I'm a tenth of the way, but I'm probably about a quarter of the way into 20th Century Boys. What did you now that you finished it? What do you think?
Well, I haven't finished it because I'm only line 14 just came out, so it goes to 20.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that's right.
I like it a lot. If Johanna actually was kind of leery because she thought it was getting a little old, and then you have a big shift in theme and tone in volume 13.
Okay. Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah, it's really good. I mean, it's like I said, the first 12 volumes are the kind of the mystery of who is our friend. Mm-hmm. And when they answer that question, and this is a great Urasawa, he says, okay, well, here's the answer, but guess what? It doesn't really tell you what it's going to tell you. And you're like, oh, okay. Now let's deal with this new problem that I'd like to show you. No. So if anybody who's read Monster will know that. I mean, he does that really well. So
yeah, to an almost frustrating degree. I mean, it's one of the things about 20th Century Boys. I was reading along with it. Oh, we're getting close to no. Now we're moving over here. Okay, that's really no. Now we're moving over here. And brilliantly done, but still, you got to be ready for that kind of storytelling.
Yeah. I mean, he that's such a good series because he's got this mystery, and he's taking 24 volumes. He's taking his time, and I like the fact he's jumping between timelines to keep interesting. So
that is so hard to do too.
It is. I mean, I would love to see what notes he had on the plotting, because that's got to be something that he had to sit down and work out for a lot.
I have this disturbing image of things scrawled all over the walls, and just this. I have it in my head.
Oh my goodness. And his poor staff. Although the guy who does amazing plotting, the other guy is One Piece, is Odo.
I've heard good things about that. Yeah.
I still have to read volume 56, which just came out like last month, but I'm really impressed. I mean, up through volume 55, he's gotten progressively better. It's been a really engaging story with just great world building and really good character development. I mean, one of the things that's amazing is you read Luffy as he appears in like volume 50, but then go back and read the first couple volumes, and it's like, this is a different guy. He's a much more mature man, and so it's that's amazing. And the nice thing that Viz is doing is they print the letter columns, which are really kind of part of the joy of the manga. And I only thought that like DC and Marvel fans got this obsessed about continuity, but his fans are like seriously obsessed, and they go back and they say, hey, you know, in panel 4 of volume 8, you said that this character did this, but in volume 15, he said that he did this. Well, how do you reconcile that? Or they catch him with like art glitches. They go,
No.
how come this character isn't wearing a hat in panel 5 of this page? And it's like, because we messed up. I mean, one of the nice things is his honesty. He's like, okay, yeah, we messed up, and we're not going back to fix that. You know, we're too busy trying to create the current chapter to worry about fixing all the flaws. And then he throws stuff in the background too, intentionally.
Oh,
like,
really?
there's a little guy. It's called Panda Man, who appears in crowd scenes, and he intentionally inserts him, and then, you know, fans get a great glee out of saying, "Oh, I caught Panda Man," and, you know,
nice.
it's amazing. So, yeah, I mean, and he, you know, when he blows it big, like there was a big continuity mistake where I'm trying to remember. I think like a character gets killed in one panel and shows up in the background like 2 panels later.
Yeah.
And he's just like, "Oh, well, that's his twin brother." I was like, "Very nice, very nice, very Marvel, very good, very good."
Yeah. So Terry Pratchett saying that all of my books are completely consistent. However, there may be alternate pasts. So just be aware of that.
Yeah, that's good.
That
that's
works. But yeah, and actually, I mean, One Piece is remarkable just for the fact that, I mean, that's one of those shonen titles, the Shonen Jump titles, that has just, you know, stayed around for a huge amount of time, even compared to the others, and that is still, you know, it hasn't really seen that controversy or different quality or so forth. Its fans have remained its fans. You know, I mean, you know, Dragon Ball Z had its haters, Bleach has its haters, Naruto has its haters. One Piece, you know, there are folks who aren't interested, but other than that, it really, it's there.
Yeah, I mean, it's been amazing. Plus, you know, you kind of wonder where the plateau is, because he's currently, each volume breaks the sales record for the past volume, and each volume is a new sell record. I mean, I think volume 60 or 61 came out in Japan and sold like 2 million copies in 3 days. It's like amazing. So
yeah.
And meanwhile, Marvel's like putting out a press release. Hey, 20,000 copies, man! We're doing awesome. Yeah, okay, sure.
Yeah. And they wonder what the problem is when, you know, I go to pick up Spider-Man. I'm like, who is this person? What's going on? I'm never going to know. Okay, never mind. Yeah,
exactly. So, but actually, if to get back to translations a little bit, particularly because when we talk about anime, the thing that always gets me is when you catch words on the screen, or you hear words that aren't translated in the subtitles. I think one of my favorites is always when somebody says a character's name, and for whatever reason they just say, they just use "you" or something. I'm like, no, he said Akira. We all heard it. I mean, it's not like I hate you. He said I hate. You know, well, essentially, I hate you, Akira.
Yeah.
So I'm like, why not just put his name in there?
Yeah, it's tough. And it's interesting because, I mean, Japanese having a very different, you know, structure than English. You know, you have that whole problem that, you know, they don't really have personal pronouns. So I remember listening to one translator talk about that and saying he did it that way for a while on one of these, you know, old things from the 90s, and it's kind of depressing that that's old now. Anyway. And it turned out they use other people's names like everything. So it was Akira, I love you. Tetsuo, you know, this. And it was just, you know, your mind exploded after a while. It is that difficulty that, you know, how do you translate those things where just it's the intricacies of the language, and getting back to that question, you know, what is the author's intent? You know, is it important to have that name? And sometimes it really is. I mean, you know, certainly we've seen things where someone yells out someone's, you know, name, and instead, you know, they're yelling out, "It's you." Like, no, that really does make a difference.
Well, the other one is things like they'll say something like "lucky." When those English words pop up, and they don't have exactly the same meaning in English. And so they're trying to figure out, well, what do we do with that? And I'm like, well, I think 90% of us are smart enough to figure out what the context is.
Yeah.
Like if an example would be like if they're at a machine, like a machine, and they're getting prizes out of it, and you know, somebody gets like the grand prize, and everybody goes, you know, lucky, and you realize it's not that they're celebrating; they're jealous because they all got crappy prizes.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it's funny because they'll you know, they might translate it as "I'm jealous," and we're like, look, we all know that's not what they said. I mean, come on. Yes, it's accented English, but it's still English. I mean, give us a little credit. I mean, if you're going to say "I'm jealous," put it in parentheses or something.
Yeah, totally.
Or the other one, my favorite is the all-purpose, probably the perfect all-purpose word in Japan is "hai." Because I mean, and it's amazing because you'll see two people talking to each other.
It means maybe.
Well, or you'll see. Well, the thing that kills me is like you'll be watching like a heavy military drama, and the guy will bark out an order, and the guy will go "hi," and I'm like, that seems really informal.
Yeah.
But you can tell that it's like really serious, and the guy's not being disrespectful, and you're like, how do you use that word to mean yeah I'll do it, and then the next minute it means yes sir, right away sir, and I'm like. We don't have anything like that in English.
No,
just
absolutely
nothing.
Not. Yeah, you switch to Lucky Star. Hi, you know.
Yeah.
It is weird. Then you have the very specific words which are just kind of untranslatable. Actually, it reminds me in Princess Mononoke. There's a story that when Neil Gaiman was doing the adaptation on that, when the monk, and I forget his name, I always forget his name, when he's drinking the bowl of soup.
Yes.
Introduced, and the actual line is, "This tastes like water."
Yeah.
And in Japanese, that's a terrible insult. But to us, it's like, it's just water. So you had to translate it. It tastes like donkey piss, and so it has the effect it's intended, but that's not the. That's a tough one.
Yeah. Well, that's a tough one too, and it's like, particularly because Mononoke was meant to be kind of an all ages one. I'm like, yeah. I mean, that's an infamous line, and I always think, Neil, you didn't need to 15 it, okay? That the classic practice of making it more adult. I was like, you're right. I mean, this tastes terrible or something. I mean, you could have something you could have worked out with that one. Yeah. I was trying to think for anime. It's so tough too because you have to match lip flaps, and that's. Yeah. See, and people never appreciate that. And I'm like, when you think about all the technicalities that are going into it, one, you have to translate it. Then you have to make it readable English. And then you only have so many syllables to say that line.
Yeah.
And so now you've got to deal with, okay, and I've got to make the syllables match. And then it's Japanese has a different cadence than English.
Yeah.
So now that poor actor is like, okay, I got to match the lip flaps. I've got to say this English line, but I've got to say it to a Japanese rhythm, and I'm like, look, people don't appreciate that what goes into a dub.
Absolutely, yeah.
And if it sounds a little flat, I'm willing to forgive them because there's a lot that they're doing.
Absolutely, you got to maintain the emotion of the scene, the emotion of the character, stay true to the overall, vocal style of the character, so that Spike doesn't suddenly sound like Vicious. And you got to hit all those lip flaps and seem natural, like it's just something. When the original version was, is usually kind of sort of matched to the Japanese voice. So
yeah, I guys I like. Crispin Freeman is actually an excellent voice actor to talk about the craft of it. So he and even like guys like Greg Arrow when they're talking about like the technicalities of like getting in the booth and doing it. I generally tend to watch stuff subtitled, but I have a lot of appreciation for what those poor dub actors go through.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, there are some amazing dubs too. I mean, people forget. The classic I always point to is like Cowboy Bebop was just phenomenal, and I mean. Even when I watch it in Japanese, I end up putting Steve Bloom's voice in for Spike. It just because it doesn't work any way else for me. I'm like, no, Steve Bloom is Spike. Everybody else is just pretending. I'm sorry.
and it's weird because that matches his normal voice so closely.
Oh yeah. It's really weird to listen to him speak because your first thought is, it's Spike. Spike's speaking to me. All right.
Actually, a neat story on that. Speaking of Bebop, I was listening to an interview with Shinichiro Watanabe, and someone asked, "Where the heck did Ed come from?" And he said, "We actually made Ed so that if you ever meet Yoko Kanno in real life, your reaction will be precisely, 'Oh my gosh, it's Ed.'"
Oh my god.
Yeah, and I have since seen behind the scenes with Yoko Kanno, and he's right, actually.
Wow.
Yoko Kanno is this very eccentric, tiny Japanese woman who runs around and glomps people basically, and is just very hyper and brilliant, and just very, very strange. But it's like that, and I mean, I remember going back to Bebop and watching bits of it recently and realizing how that main cast is stunning, but I mean the side characters, everyone just hits it on that one.
Yeah, that's I don't know. I don't know what the production studio is because it's obviously the same studio that was doing like Stand on the Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex, which is another phenomenal dub. Yeah, I mean Ocean View in that I don't think they exist anymore. Ocean View Studios used to be up in Vancouver. They were doing a lot of stuff for Viz, like Inuyasha, and they were really good. And actually, ADV, once they really got like into full swing in the mid 2000s, were doing really good work too.
Yeah, they had a very solid studio. And it's another thing I think a lot of folks don't really appreciate is how this stuff. The dubbing for a long time was so fragmented that I remember Crispin Freeman indeed talking about how he'd have to do some dubs in New York and some dubs in Texas and some in LA, and he's bouncing all over the place because there really was no consistent industry doing this. It would just be that Michael St. Nicholas up in New York Post happened to grab this one random OVA from 1992, and so he now has the ability to dub it, so everyone has to go up there, and it's when you're doing that and you're trying to get people, and that's one of the reasons why you didn't get Crispin Freeman in every single thing, because he just wasn't available.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a good point too, and realizing that once they moved everything in house, that helped a lot with consistency. When you were the translators, the adapters, the engineers were all literally in one building. So
yeah, absolutely, and it is. I forget which person as a Funimation or something talking about that and how difficult it is to budget and get that all structured. It's not like you have a bank of booths that you can just bring people into, and trying to get them all in and scheduled, and so you can actually get the DVD. It's one of the reasons why DVDs don't come out a month after the Japanese release. It takes time.
Well, and that's the amazing thing with the simulcasting where.
Wow.
I mean, it's funny because Crunchyroll is going through the same kind of growth pains that Tokyo Pop went through for a while, and that is you're taking on a lot of projects, and you got to hire as many people as you can. Some of the stuff kind of slips through the cracks because you just don't have time.
Yeah.
Particularly on a simulcast, if you realize that you've forgotten like a knot, and so the character says, I do. I do want to die, and like, no, shouldn't it be not? I do not want to die. But unfortunately, when you're simulcasting it, you don't have time to go back and fix that. And so, same thing. I mean, every professional who's worked on manga knows sometimes something just slips through the cracks, and you even no matter if you have 5 or 15 eyes on it, sometimes just one little word for some reason everybody misses, and not as they're saying, like 9 times out of 10 they get their copy of the book and they open the page, they find the page instantly with this mistake, and they're like, oh, I can't believe we messed that up, and it's like, we misspelled that, oh man, and it's like, if you've ever like proofed something. and after you've handed it in, it's usually the moment you find that one last mistake, and you're like, oh man.
Let me just go shut down my email right now because this is going to get bad from this point on.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think we've gotten just, and fandom in general has gotten just a lot pickier in the past 5 or 10 years? Because it seems like, if there is one misspelling on page 58 of someone's, Romanized version of a name, then suddenly, oh my gosh, the publishers and translators are complete, unprofessional fools.
Yeah, I mean, it's really crazy. And I have to laugh at some of it because I get a great example of like the fan community not knowing what they're talking about was Bill Flanagan was doing the translation for the Tsubasa Chronicles for Del Rey, and there was a lot of debate on how Faye's name was supposed to be Faye Flowright, and so Bill spelled it as he thought the proper romanization was F-A-I. And the fan community went nuts. Oh, he's a hack. And I'm like, okay, a guy with 25 plus years of experience is the hack.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And how many college courses did you take? All right. So I mean, literally,
online.
Yeah, for a couple of years, he had scanlators were like ragging him for getting it wrong and blah blah. Well, when the character guide came out and Clamp actually Romanized everything themselves, guess who was right?
Nice.
I said, yeah, you know what? If I got to put money down, I'm betting on the guy with the 25 years plus over the guy who last summer took a course.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know why fans. I think what it is some of it is just people want an excuse not to buy the product.
True.
To feel like better about it.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be honest. Around 2002 through 2004, Tokyo Pop was making some pretty big mistakes in their either translations or in their edit.
True.
I mean, people forget this, but there were like 2 or 3 websites that just loved to list every mistake in a Tokyo Pop book. They just lived for that. And yeah, I mean, it was shameful and it was frustrating to read bad English or panels that they'd forgot to fill in the words.
Oopsie.
Yeah. But in those cases, you can understand why people want to hold off and wait till like third printings,
sure,
to fix the corrections. But you take a company like Viz, who's always put out a quality product, and if you're going to complain because they misspelled some word, when you're looking at like 50 volumes on your shelf and they've made maybe 5 mistakes in 50 volumes, well, can you match that kind of track record? I mean, that's impressive.
Exactly, and as we're saying, there are so many different steps involved. I think a lot of folks don't appreciate just all the different pieces involved there, and the fact that it just the ball can get dropped in any of those. I'm frankly surprised. It's like the guys in Mystery Science Theater 3000 who made fun of bad movies said, we got through that and we had the greatest, most tremendous respect for movies because we realized how many things that can go wrong.
Oh, right.
It is amazing when you see something like all the Tezuka stuff that Vertical is bringing out. I mean,
right.
You talk about a challenge. You're bringing out some of the stuff that's considered holy by the Japanese, and over here, you're trying to hold that up to that standard, and the fact that it's been as high quality as it is, and it's stunningly high quality, is just it's amazing.
Well, yeah. Now, Vertical might be one of the few companies that has something like a 90% dual language ratio for their employees.
Yeah.
It's insane. I mean, because Yanni speaks several languages. English and Japanese are just 2 of them. Ed Chavez is bilingual. I mean, it was really weird when I was looking at the company listing one time and went, wait a minute, wow, here are the list of people who actually who can work as translators in their own right, let alone working for Vertical. And I thought, I don't even think Viz has this kind of ratio numbers. And like I said, if you go back, Matt Thorne, did you read Matt Thorne's post from last week about Tokyo Pop and translations?
I don't think so. No, I don't think it's under the radar.
Oh, that's an amazing post. Well, the thrust of the post was that when Tokyo Pop really started dumping product in the market, two things happened. One, quality of translations went down, and the second thing was page rates went down. And so he was kind of bemoaning the fact of how Tokyo Pop had really hurt the industry in a sense for doing that. But he was talking about he had gotten hired at Viz in the early 90s, and he actually had to go in and take a written test to prove language proficiency.
Wow.
And he said it was not an easy test. It wasn't like, can you translate a kid cartoon? It was like, no, can you do a real translation, of several pages of text that we find, to be acceptable, that shows a real proficiency with the language. And, guys like Bill Flanagan and Mari Morimoto, all of them had to go through that same weeding process where, they had to prove their skills before they were allowed to touch a book. And then, guys like Bill and Mari and Matt, Mari's a girl, but people like that, they ended up, they're not only translators, but they're also their own adapters. And, like Matt was saying, he's like, they didn't give me that job. I had to be a translator for several years and prove a proficiency with Japanese. And then, an editor, after a couple of years, an editor started working with me like, let's kind of train you on how to do adaptation and what our philosophy of adaptation is. And then once I showed I had skills as an English writer as well as a Japanese translator, then they would give me a book and say, here you go. Give us a finished product. And you got, 90 days or whatever.
Yeah, and I think that's that's what you're gonna have. That's what you're gonna see in those sorts of houses. And one of the difficulties is that I love that, and I doubt we're gonna see lots of companies willing to put in that kind of time and effort. Nor should they necessarily. I mean, I think for a lot of manga, Angelic Layer.
Yeah.
Do I really need someone who has spent 25 years in the field to translate this? If throw it out there for $9.99.
Right.
I'm fine with that.
There's true. There's not a lot of manga that deserves that kind of treatment. But it was nice that Viz was doing that. And,
absolutely. We need that, no question.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always difficult when you're doing kind of a silly shonen story as to like what are you going to do. I was thinking Toriko might be one where you can let things slip a little bit because it's all about eating animals. Really, you're not really worried about like, wow, that was a deep philosophical question. I hope they really got the subtext of that correctly. He's just eating something, man. Don't worry about it. There's not a subtext other than this is good.
Yeah, I actually have a video where I took a panel of Toriko or took a page of Toriko and just analyzed every possible subtext and meaning I could possibly pull out of it. And like he's holding on to something like with both arms. Like, this is very reminiscent of Christ with a cross and bearing our sin. It just goes on and on. And,
right.
And,
my goodness.
And to their credit, everyone, pretty much every comment on that video, folks get the joke.
Right.
No, I'm not actually saying that Toriko is this deep allegory of spiritual meaning. But yeah, I mean, there's you got plenty of those goofy manga. So one of the nice things about manga is that you have that huge range of material.
Right.
You can just go to wherever you want.
True. I mean, talk about translation issues. Now I'm thinking about Sayonara. Zentsubo says, "Oh my!"
Yeah.
Now, for those of us who remember the first 5 volumes, where I believe the translator actually officially went insane, because an amazing job translated every joke, every cultural reference. I like it. I'm enough of an information wonk that I dug that kind of stuff. But at the same time, you got to think if if they're only making like $7 or $8 a page, there's no way that that guy can work on more than that book like each month.
Yeah.
He's not making enough to live off, unless Del Rey's going to say, "Okay, look, we admit, this is the only thing you're going to be able to do. So we're gonna like bump your page rate up to like $20 a page or something, because let's face it, this is it for you."
For all time.
So they ended up. I think. I would suspect that the translator probably asked to be removed from the project. I would have a hard time, because it was a really well done translation. I have a hard time Del Rey going, we're going to have to fire this guy. He's just not working out. Yeah, why? Well, he's overworking. We can't stand this level of competence. What's going on? And then, so they cut down like on the cultural references and stuff. Which, to be honest, the jokes are fairly broad. I mean, it's nice to get the cultural reference, but a lot of the jokes were just like, "Oh, he's a man whore." Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It just happens to be that he'll cite 7 cultural examples of people who are man whores, and it's like, okay, well, yeah.
Well, and I tried to pick up Zetsubo Sensei manga, and I think Volume 1, and there was so much there. Frankly, I was intimidated. And I understood. Okay, that's the kind of thing it was, but I was like,
Right.
that's just so much to try to understand in one manga. It's also tough too, I think, with those comedy manga where you're trying to figure out, is this Azumanga Daioh where I'm just supposed to laugh, or is it something where there's just a lot there that really rewards the complexity of thought, but just the really rewards spending the time to really understand the context. Hard to say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Lucky Star is a little bit like that in that it's meant to be a lot of in-jokes for otaku in Japan, so the more obscure stuff the better off you are. But at the same time, I mean, it's got a nice broad sweep of comedy that if you don't get all the subtleties of a joke, that's not a problem.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's another one where, the poor translators really have to kind of work at it.
Yeah.
And actually, in humor, the Japanese love puns.
And, yeah.
And that's the translator's nightmare right there, because 9 times out of 10 you can't preserve the pun, and so you have to go for a joke, and you're like, well, what's an English joke that kind of gets the Japanese point across? And I'm like, man, we really don't pay you guys enough sometimes. We really don't.
Actually, a good example of that in anime, in My Name is Totoro, there's a moment where see here, Satsuki is Satsuki, right? May and
yeah, I think it's Satsuki. That sounds right. I'll go with that.
Yeah. She's sending the letter home to her mother, and there's a note there where she says, "I'm so frustrated with May because she's just like, insert name of crab god here. I forget what it was."
Right.
And there's a little drawing of May with little like lobster ears, and it's really cute. But looking at it, and actually Carl Maychek did the dub of that for Fox, and I can just see him looking at that and saying, "No, that's we're making this for 7-year-olds. I'm not going to get that." So in his version, she says something like, May drew a picture for you. Make sure you look at it." And so she turns it over, and it's this little drawing, and so she chuckles. Yeah. And it's a great example of something where there's just no way of getting that across. Even if you have a little line at the bottom, it would end up being one of those full paragraph descriptions. Well, this is this god that came back from and the eyes glaze over, and so you just have to go in a completely different direction with that. And I don't think that in a lot of ways there's just no getting around it. And I'm sure we've both seen examples of something where you try to preserve it and you end up with this giant caption or a giant asterisk, and it just the humor is gone.
Right. I'll tell you, did you ever watch Excel Saga?
I have not, because I need to watch that with other people to enjoy it, I think.
Okay. The ADV for a while was doing something called Cultural Notes.
Okay.
And Excel Saga is another one of these otaku in-joke kind of things. There is a scene, and I can't remember what episode it is. It is... I actually need to watch it again and take a picture of this scene. There's a scene where she's falling down a well, and literally like every half second there is some visual joke being made.
Wow.
And so if you have it with the cultural notes popped up, there's actually a moment, because I actually froze it to the frame. There's a moment where the entire screen is cultural notes. You cannot see the anime anymore. It is filled with cultural notes. And it was like, that is awesome. There you go. You win the Geek Award when the English language company is like, we can't even show you the picture anymore because we're trying to explain all the jokes.
You have won now. Yeah.
Actually, another one where they had to end up, on the DVD, they ended up putting this insane reference section is actually one that Bill Flanagan worked on, and he talks about this. He used to have a website called Translation Dojo, where he was telling stories about being a translator.
Yeah.
And it's still up. He hasn't updated it in a while, which is a shame because he was telling some wonderful stories. And he was talking about the nightmare of translating this thing because it was this esoteric kind of end of the world anime where the guy was bringing in like tantric Buddhism and just Chinese astrology. I mean, it was like 3 or 4 different occult systems that the guy was working with. And this is only a 90-minute OVA. I mean, this is so. So you go to the special features, and there's literally like 20 screens of, let us explain to you all the occult references in this thing. Like, he mentions this book. This actually really exists. It's a Buddhist text, and here's the main thrust of it. And yes, this God actually exists, and blah blah blah. And it was really funny because he mentions he couldn't figure out one reference, one astrological reference, and he just forever. He kept saying, I can't find this. I can't find it I can't find an English equivalent. And the way he realized is that the guy had gotten the Greek name of like one of the stars in Orion's belt wrong. And so when the guy converted it from Greek to into not kanji but katakana, of course that just furthered it, and he realized, oh, that's what he did. Okay, and he says. So then his question is, well, do I preserve the mistake, or do I, and then just let them throw this at the end of the disc, or do I go ahead and put the real star name up there, which was a great example of that, which is really funny because I talked to him about it. I was like, Bill, I hope you got paid because all those notes you made, they were on the screen, dude. I mean, they put that on the disc. He's like, really? I was like, yeah. If you haven't seen the disc, your notes are there, man.
God bless him. My goodness, that's wonderful.
And I can't imagine he got paid enough for that either. So
no.
Yeah, I mean, that's. I mean, things like Full Metal Alchemist, which I love, or
I just got finished watching Rurouni Kenshin.
Yeah, that's another good example.
Yeah, for those who don't know, one of the problems with Kenshin is the fact that a lot of the characters are quasi-historical. It's
right.
He was under the Shingumi, but he wasn't like this at all. It's really tough to understand. Where the history begins and where the fiction ends and so forth, and then just all the little references where this is a society 150 years ago. There are some things that just aren't there anymore.
Right. Well, I was going to say, like with Full Metal Alchemist, where she's actually using real alchemy and alchemic symbols. Yeah. Again, that's a tough one where you're going to have to just start. I mean, even for a Japanese audience, I would imagine there had to be like footnotes in that manga because. She's using a lot of Western alchemy, and I can't imagine that's taught in the Japanese high school. Yeah, there you go. You guys might read a manga one day that's like really alchemic. So let us explain who Trimercuries is.
It actually sounds like an anime. It sounds like that one high school where they teach alchemy and all these things you need to know in case you ever stumble across it in a manga someday.
Oh, right. Or actually, the other one is Negama.
Oh, really?
Because the attack names are Latin.
Oh, right. True.
And they're actually apparently real Latin.
Really?
Or at least,
I'm impressed.
Or at least Akamatsu's attempt at being real Latin. So, nothing like having to deal with Japanese and then realize, oh, by the way, you didn't happen to study Latin too, right? Oh, yeah.
Of course.
Of course, sure. Yes. And any other languages you need me to master? Sure.
Let's throw in Russian and something else, just for the heck of it.
That's right. And Finnish, because Only like 5 million people in the world speak this language. It's almost a dead language. Here, learn it.
But sure, why not? Yeah.
Sure. Just because the Japanese author had nothing better to do.
That's what I can't understand. Is we all know they're working 90 hours a week. Why bother to go out and just keep it all in Japanese? We're fine, you're fine. You can now actually go and have a drink. We're all cool.
Well, now Akamatsu has an insane number of assistants.
That's true. That's true.
Wow. Well, actually, the interesting thing was there was Urasawa. They did a Japanese television did a special on him, and somebody threw it up on YouTube and fan subbed it.
Oh, nice.
And what was amazing was to look at his studio system.
Oh yeah.
And it was weird because I was this week as I was reading the Takahashi stuff in one of the books they had a picture of her studio, and they both had the same studio setup. It's
really?
like 6 or 8 assistants. They're facing each other, and then their desk is and then the desk that they work at is like at the head of the row.
Okay.
So I'm like, this looks like high school. Why would you duplicate high school in your work environment? But I guess that works well for them.
Yeah.
And I thought if 2 of them set it up, it can't be coincidence.
That's got to be and I guess when your studio is basically a 20 by 20 foot room, that's
right.
All you got. It's like there's really no other. You got to have your wall of manga,
right.
And you got to have your PlayStation and Xbox over there, and then your materials, and you're good to go.
So. Yeah, I mean, it is pretty amazing to look at the conditions they work in.
Oh man, I remember reading A Drifting Life and just being hideously depressed.
Yeah. I mean, it's actually the other one is Disappearance Diary is amazing because every once in a while he'll talk about his habits as a manga author, and his wife actually was one of his assistants.
Oh.
And so there was at one point, what did he say? He was doing 4 series at once.
Oh.
It was like 100 pages a month. And I was like, that's almost impossible, man.
Yeah.
Even with assistance, that's, I mean, because the story of that is he twice has a mental breakdown where he just literally goes out to have cigarettes, or go to the convenience store and says, "Screw this, I'm not going back."
Wow.
Just runs away.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, yeah, when you've been doing like 100 pages a month for a year, I understand that breakdown. But then I thought the poor thing is he just walks away and his wife is like left dealing with the workload. I'm like,
that's not cool,
dude.
No. That's
Dude.
It's gonna be a quiet lunch when he gets back. I'll put it that way.
So yeah, I mean, it is amazing to look at some of the stuff that they put out.
Yeah.
And people just don't realize that.
No, it's one of the amazing things too is that they really had no reason to do it other than love of the medium. They weren't they weren't getting paid much. There was not much recognition. They were doing it because they really believed in the Gekiga movement or what have you.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, like the Ninja Consultants put up a chart that for a weekly artist who was doing 20 pages a week, and literally he would get 6 hours of sleep a night, and he had for the whole week he got 4 hours of free time. Because I mean it was, and obviously he's having to use assistants. You can't do 20 pages in a week, but it was like 4 hours. You get 4 hours off a week. Man, I am not complaining anymore. And this is just to make comics.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and this is the successful one.
Yeah.
This is someone who actually has, he's making money off of it compared to the folks who are, laboring to get their break in one of the smaller magazines, not even Shonen Jump, one of these smaller magazines.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I mean, when you read some of these statistics about the number of submissions these magazines get every month, it's just staggering.
It is staggering. It's amazing that people still still want to do it. I mean, the other one is the other side of the house is looking at the animation studios, and how little money actually there are given to make the product. I mean, when I look at some of these series, I think, considering that they're making a whole season, like 13 episodes for like $250,000.
Yeah,
it's insane. How do you do that? And that's, I mean, it was really funny because when I saw the presentation at Otakon, and the guy said, "Let me iterate. This is not a mistake. This is $250,000 for 13 episodes. That's not $250,000 an episode."
Perfect. Yeah.
He's like, and then you wonder, why are they shipping stuff overseas? Because it's like, even if they keep the money in Japan, they can't pay anybody a living wage with that, and
they're not.
And then you watch even like Paranoia Agent. Like if you ever watch, if you listen to the Paranoia Agent one, which was just I think part of it was he did his like really crazy.
Yeah.
But there is like the second episode of the series, they literally delivered to the studio like 2 hours before it had to air, because the original director quit, and like all the people they had hired were already working on their episodes, and so it was like, at some point we know we have to make the second episode, but we're like in the middle of making our own, and of course, like I said, the problem with that one was it was the second episode, and so when finally people had free time, it was like, okay, well, we have like 2 weeks to get this done. Go.
Wasn't that the one that Cohn just like keyed all of it himself?
He did a bunch of work on that one. Yeah, because he ended up being director.
Yeah.
He ended up having to do some rewrites on the script.
I remember there being one episode where he said, we just got up to that point where I was like, okay, I'm not really an animator, but I'm going to key them all anyway, because I'm the only one left. And it's like,
Yeah, and thankfully, I mean, he's a very good drawer too. So
yeah,
because I mean, it is interesting that not all directors can draw.
No, certainly not. Actually, I forget who wrote something recently about who I was reading about the difference between the different directors at Studio Ghibli.
Oh wow!
And saying that Takahata can't draw.
Oh yeah.
He's not really an artist, and so he is much more of a story-driven person.
Right.
Whereas Miyazaki is just so into the characters and so forth because he's seeing them, in his mind.
Well, and that's as people have pointed out, I mean, they work well together. When Miyazaki's kind of given free rein, it's like he forgets that you're supposed to tell a story at the end of the day.
Yeah. Because
he gets caught in the visuals, and I mean, there's a reason it took him 10 years to finish Nausicaa the manga. So. Yeah. Particularly if you're going to be, you're going to be OCD about like all the details and everything.
Let's crosshatch obsessively,
yes.
every single. Oh my gosh.
Well, actually, Oda does that. Oda does a lot of crosshatching for One Piece. You know why? He says it's quicker than toning.
Oh, gotcha.
So I can crosshatch quicker than I can like pull out a piece of tone and do all the crazy stuff. He's like, forget it. I was like, yeah, good point. Because because most manga artists have to have somebody who is a tone specialist, so they can like crank that stuff out left and right.
Yeah,
it's you see it like in shoujo is really tone heavy.
Yeah,
and I mean there's some I look and I'm like, wow, that assistant really worked on this thing, because everything in this is tone.
And tone is tough. I mean, I've done a lot of fiddling with that, and getting it just to match exactly right, and then just trying to get the exact right tone that you want. I mean, it is. It consistently stuns me. The more I dive into manga and anime, the more I realize just how much goes into it.
Well, I don't know if they sell them anymore, but there was a time when Deleter, the company that makes most of the tones in Japan, sold these little kits that you could. They were like $20, so they're a little expensive. But what it was is it would be a picture, and then 4 or 5 tone sheets. And then they would tell you how to tone the picture, so you could actually do it. And so I went and bought one time just for the fun of it, and I was like, "Oh, this is just insane! Why would you do this?"
This is why they have a specialist there to do it for them, I guess.
But I mean, because cutting it out and then pasting it and then having to trim it and then of course they were doing like the advanced. They were like giving you hints for advanced techniques, like if you want to create like a shading effect, so you might actually lightly scratch part of the tone. And I was like, oh, you're crazy, man! Look, I'm done.
And then you pull out "Oh My Goddess," and you see just tone everywhere, and you see how he draws the leather in the jacket and how it's oh man, stunning stuff.
It is. I mean, it just amazing to look at the artwork on that stuff.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think we have covered our topic extremely well.
All right.
So, thank you very much, Ed. Glad to have you on. I'm glad to have you talking about this with us. Hope to have you again on soon.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. It was great.
Great. And I will see you all later. Take care.
All right.